1915, a much bigger studio was opened, Universal City. Chaney became one of hundreds of actors trying to get work, but he had the edge on the rest because of his skill with makeup. This was the makeup case he used at Universal. It was an ordinary lunchbox, but out of it, Chaney conjured an extraordinary gallery. He had his makeups photographed so that he could judge what worked and what didn't on film. These were stills Chaney sent home to his brother. Sometimes he was recognizable, but often he had to indicate which part he played. I was playing a wild man. This is me, just below the X sign. Here I am a Russian prince. The films from Chaney's early career were almost all destroyed by Universal to recover the silver. Of 110 films he made for the studio, only 4 exist complete. Those that survive are often ravaged copies, too shrunk sometimes to go through a printer. But archives and collectors struggle to save what they can. The National Film Archive in London saved this earliest example of Chaney playing 2 roles, both hunchbacks, one in a vision, the other, in reality, a fisherman. A collector in England rescued this film, which displays the beauty of Chaney's movements, even if the acting style belongs to the stage. It contains the only surviving shot of Chaney dancing, all too brief. Chaney was taken up by the director Joseph de Grasse and his wife Ida May Park, also a director. De Grasse encouraged Chaney to develop his ability with bizarre characters, and together the team made more than 60 pictures. During this period, Chaney began directing films himself, and he even tried script writing. But he wasn't allowed to carry out his ideas, so he returned to acting. In The Scarlet Car, directed by de Grasse, Chaney plays an elderly bank teller who catches his employers cooking the books. Chaney had married Hazel Hastings while he was at Universal. Creighton came home from boarding school to live with them. Hazel persuaded Lon to ask Universal for a raise.
He had asked for $125 a week and a 5-year contract, and the studio manager, William Sistrom, refused. He says, "You're never going to be worth more than $100 a week."
He left, but outside Universal he endured weeks of unemployment. His career was saved by Western star William S. Hart, who gave him an important part in a film now lost. This surviving scene came from the archive in Moscow. Chaney came to public notice and began to get work. He was even employed back at Universal with a director called Todd Browning. Browning was one of the most remarkable directors of the silent era. A former carnival barker, he revealed an obsession for the morbid and bizarre. He created disturbing dramas, the stories of which he often wrote himself. His collaboration with Chaney began with this picture, long considered lost. He presented the underworld with an uncompromising toughness. He never allowed his characters to look like actors. Here he signals to his audience that Priscilla Dean is playing a streetwalker, having trouble with her shoes. He throws in a dope addict. Chaney and Priscilla Dean play hard-bitten characters who don't care if the audience thinks them obnoxious. This was startling at the time. But it was the Miracle Man that made Chaney Hollywood's most outstanding character actor. He played one of 4 crooks who tried to cash in on a series of apparent miracles performed by a blind faith healer. Director George Lone Tucker wanted a real contortionist, but none of those he found could act. Chaney did a test so convincingly, Tucker was shaken.
Everyone used to say Chaney was a contortionist or he was double-jointed. It's not true. If you really watch that on the healing sequence, when he comes up and he'll do like the handle snap out like this, or he'll snap the joint like this. It's all acting. It's all just acting.
In the story, Chaney pretends to be a crippled beggar in the process of being cured by the faith healer, the crooks ready to fleece a gullible public. Then a real miracle occurs. The Miracle Man was Paramount's biggest money-maker of the year, and a tremendous hit for Chaney. Chaney's fame brought him no leading man parts, but more character roles. Here he plays a Canadian trapper, supposedly lost in the mountains. Chaney loved the mountains, and location trips like this were a holiday for him. In this minor film, he plays opposite Betty Blythe. The Penalty is a forgotten masterpiece, so brutal that protests appeared in the press. Based on a novel by Gouverneur Morris, it was hardly the sort of film one associates with the Age of Innocence.
The Penalty had the censors running for their scissors as quick as they could. I mean, you had a dope fiend in it, you had a murder, you had a naked model, and you had this character who wants to cut off another man's legs and have them grafted onto his own. You watch it today and you say, it's a really powerful film. Back then, Variety said, here's a film as cheerful as a hanging.
Chaney plays Blizzard, a gangster whose legs were amputated when he was a boy by this girl's father. For Chaney, seen here with writer Gouverneur Morris, this was as important a role as the Miracle Man.
Everything he trained for, everything that he was, that he learned throughout the years, came through in this part. Chaney actually strapped his legs behind him, walked on his knees, and refused to do trick angles. This is the back of the jacket of the costume for The Penalty. You'll notice the lower portion here of the jacket is very long, much longer than in the front, and has a wider swoop in the back. This was designed so that Chaney could hide his bent-up legs and still appear like a real double amputee to the audience. Chaney put his bent-up legs into these leather stumps, and then the oversized pants and the oversized coat completed the effect.
The pain was so intense that Chaney could only stand wearing the stumps for 10-20 minutes at a time. Blizzard takes his revenge. He plans to have this young doctor's legs removed in an underground operating theater. Fascinated by the criminal mind, Chaney wrote articles on prison reform. He paid visits to the underworld as an observer. He was aided by law enforcement officers like William J. Burns, here visiting Chaney and Todd Browning on the set of Outside the Law.
Outside the Law has to be a turning point in the Chaney-Browning collaboration. Of course, he plays the gangster Black Mike Silva. He's vicious, he's terrible, he's villainous. He's also got a real interesting streak about him. Chaney would do certain things with his characters. And I remember once discussing this movie with a friend of mine who had seen it as a young boy. And he said, after I had told him I had seen it, he said, "Do they still have that scene where he picks up the tip?" There's a scene in the movie where they're all plotting to this setup of a murder. And so Chaney's the last to leave, and he pauses for a second, he looks down at the table, and he picks up the tip and pockets it. And it's a wonderful, it's a little piece of business. It doesn't mean anything, really, but it speaks volumes of the character. And then you look at what Browning did with the Chinese character. He had nothing to do with the story. The Ah Wing character that Chaney plays doesn't advance the story whatsoever. But Browning realized this was a good piece for Chaney. And if you compare his performance to the man who plays Chang Lo in the film, who's another Caucasian actor, Chaney is more Chinese than any other Caucasian actor around.
It was courageous to make this film because of widespread prejudice against the Chinese.
They were really reviled, hated, terribly mistreated, and there were even lynchings if anyone tried to speak up or protest.
There has been a wreck off the New England seaport of Urquy, and among the survivors is a Chinese cook.
Remember how completely Lon Chaney was in that role. I remember the way he walked, as if his feet had been bound or something. He had a little, very, very characteristic and memorable way that he walked. Aside from all the makeup, of course, he was made up to look Chinese, but all of the body language, the sort of humility, I remember the sort of bent way that he was. He didn't have to say anything. He didn't have to have dialogue. You just felt him. You felt his presence.
Bud Schulberg was a boy of 8 when he visited the set. The film was directed by Tom Foreman, seated, and produced by Bud Schulberg's father, B.P. Schulberg. It may not have been a box office sensation, but it was selected as one of the best pictures of 1922.
It was a very daring for then, and it still would be, I think, if they made it now.